1971. Events in East Pakistan were escalating, and another war between India and Pakistan became imminent. The Chief of Naval Staff of the Indian Navy, Admiral Nanda, became determined to ensure that the Indian Navy would not be left out of combat this time. In the War of 1971, the Indian Navy played a decisive role in India's victory over Pakistan and the liberation of Bangladesh. This video series goes into the details of the planning and operations conducted by the Indian Navy during the 1971 war between India and Pakistan. Planning phase. Changing the Navy mindset. The Indian Navy did not participate in the previous wars fought between India and Pakistan, and during the Second War of India and Pakistan in 1965, where the Indian Navy was in a defensive posture and was not expected to carry out any operations during the war. Pakistan Navy took advantage of this scenario and executed a surprise attack on various Indian ports. This attack did a lot of damage to the prestige and morale of the Indian Navy. So much so that questions were being raised on the capabilities of the Indian Navy and its potential in a combat role. Admiral Nanda had taken upon himself to prove all the critics of the Indian Navy wrong. He asked his planners to conduct a thorough threat and capability analysis of the enemy, create a strategy for its operations during the upcoming war. The core intent was to look at opportunities on how the Indian Navy can take the battle to the enemy in a more offensive role. The Indian Navy planners completed a detailed analysis of the capabilities of the enemy and the threats posed by them. They also provided detailed plans on how these threats could be overcome. The results were presented to Admiral Nanda. Admiral Nanda was not happy. The obstacle that Admiral Nanda faced in the planning phase was the defensive mindset that had creeped into the Indian naval strategists. The Navy's mindset at the planning phase was influenced by the successful operations and raids conducted by the Pakistan Navy at Dwarka in India during the 1965 war. The planners had a defensive outlook, and as a result, their plan of action for the upcoming war was for the Indian Navy to keep a defensive posture and deploying its fleet in the defense of Saurashtra and Bombay. The objective here was to prevent another hit and run from the enemy, like in 1965. For Admiral Nanda, such a conservative approach was not an acceptable strategy. He wanted a more offensive posture for the Indian Navy, where the battle would be taken to the enemy and the attacks executed at the enemy's ports. This plan would also include the Indian Navy proactively going ahead and striking the most strategic port of Pakistan, Karachi. There was considerable resistance from the planners in such a posture of the Indian Navy, especially the proposed attack of Karachi. Karachi harbour was too heavily defended for any strike from the Indian side to succeed. It would be a high-risk operation and with high possibilities of big losses for the Indian Navy. Karachi harbour was defended by 16-inch guns at the Manora Point. There were two air bases of the Pakistan Air Force close to Karachi. This, along with Pakistan warships and submarines that could be deployed along a specific perimeter to protect Karachi. Considering all this, the Navy planners had some good arguments. But their plan of action was not good enough in Admiral Nanda's book. Admiral Nanda's first step had to be to change the mindset of his staff and planners. To do so, he decided to war game the situation and scenarios with his planners. The question here to answer was, what would be the impact of an Indian Navy attack on the naval fleet and other assets in West Pakistan, including the main prize Karachi? This included wargaming various ways the Indian Navy could execute an attack on West Pakistan and assessing the probable wins and losses in each scenario. And Thereafter, the possible response and counteraction capabilities of the Pakistan Navy in the West. In the war game, it was concluded that since Karachi was such a heavily defended and fortified target, the only way to breach the defenses of Karachi and execute a successful raid at the harbour would be through the element of surprise. If surprise was achieved by the Indian side, they would be able to breach the Karachi defenses and destroy many high-value targets of the Pakistan Navy. But once the attack was initiated and the advantage from the element of surprise is gone, the Pakistan side would pursue the attacking formations with all that it has got. The biggest threat in this case would come from the Pakistan Air Force in close vicinity. With the news of an Indian attack on Karachi, the Pakistan Air Force would quickly scramble its jets to engage the Indian attacking fleet. The only caveat in this case was that the Pakistan Air Force assets near Karachi, they had a big gap. They did not have night strike capability at sea. The Indian side determined that an offensive in the close vicinity of Karachi, if launched at night time, would provide sufficient protection against Pakistan Air Force on their way back. The plan in this case would be to essentially start sail at dusk on D-Day, reach the point of attack by midnight, execute the attack, and sail out of the range of the Pakistan Air Force jets by dawn on D+1 day. The Pakistan Air Force jets' range was around 150 nautical miles. A major advantage of a successful attack would be that after that, the Pakistan naval fleet would be tied up in the defense of Karachi itself. The most that they would be able to achieve would be sporadic raids on the Indian side. This would greatly limit Pakistan Navy's role and their impact during the war. This would more or less neutralize the naval threat from Pakistan, and with the Indian Navy dominating the seas, the Indian overall plan to impose blockade on Pakistan could easily be executed. With such a blockade, West Pakistan would not be able to reinforce their forces under attack on the eastern side. Everyone agreed on the feasibility of the offensive action on Karachi to engage and neutralize the Pakistan Navy threat and cut the line of communication between West and East Pakistan. Admiral Nanda's vision for the Indian Navy as a strategic force with its primary role to safeguard the sea lanes, to keep them open, and to disrupt the enemy's trade and supply routes would have a huge impact on the outcome of war. Response assessment. In their assessment of the response of the Pakistan Navy, the Indian strategists determined that the strength of the Pakistan Navy was its underwater capability. With the type of military hardware they had acquired, indicated their focus was to build up their submarine capabilities and use them against the Indian naval assets. The Pakistan Navy had added to its fleet 3 Daphne-class submarines acquired from France, the best submarines of its time. The French government built the 3 Daphne-class submarines for Pakistan. These were commissioned in Pakistan in 1970 as PNS Hangar, PNS Shushuk, and PNS Mangrove. These were sophisticated conventional submarines that could easily outclass and outmaneuver the Indian frigates and submarines. This was a big challenge for the Indian Navy's plans of dominating the seas during the war. The Daphne-class submarines, however, did not have a very long range and could only threaten Indian assets on the western front. The Indian side did not face any threat from these submarines on the eastern side, in the Bay of Bengal. Apart from these 3 submarines, the Pakistan Navy also possessed the submarine PNS Ghazi. This submarine could be leveraged for its long-range operations. PNS Ghazi was in fact an American fleet class submarine, the USS Diablo, which was released to Pakistan in 1963, where it was commissioned as PNS Ghazi. Ghazi's endurance range was phenomenal, and therefore it was the only Pakistani submarine that could operate in the Bay of Bengal, starting all the way from Karachi. Apart from this, Pakistan also acquired a large number of midget submarines, whose basic purpose was to undertake clandestine operations like attacking ships in harbor and sabotaging ports and vital installations along the coast. These were clearly offensive weapons and were an indicator of Pakistan's intentions during the war. So, the overall underwater threat from the Pakistan Navy to the Indian side worked out to attacks by the 3 Daphne-class submarines along with the midget submarines on the west coast and PNS Ghazi on the west as well as the east coast. PNS Ghazi versus INS Vikrant. 1971. The third war between India and Pakistan was looming, and the Indian Navy was conducting a threat and capability analysis in preparation for it. A major part of the capability analysis included the decision on how to best use its only aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant. Indian Navy's first aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant, was commissioned in 1961. It was the only aircraft carrier the Indian side possessed at the time and hence was the crown jewel of the Indian Navy. It was expected to play a major role imposing the naval blockade between East and West Pakistan during the war. In early 1970, when it was clear that the war was imminent, INS Vikrant was immobile in Bombay due to serious leaks and cracks in its boilers. These cracks and fissures could not be welded, which meant it would be very difficult for the aircraft carrier to work up sufficient speed to launch its aircraft. Admiral Nanda, the chief of Indian Naval Staff at the time, decided that he wanted to see for himself as to what were the actual capabilities of Vikrant. Trials were carried out in May of 1971 to assess the capability and discuss the role of INS Vikrant in the upcoming war. By the end of June, the sea trials of INS Vikrant were successful. It was concluded INS Vikrant still had the capability to participate in the upcoming war. Despite the success in the trials, INS Vikrant still had its inherent problems, so its speed was restricted to 14 knots as a precautionary measure. With this speed, INS Vikrant could not generate enough wind speed to get its aircrafts airborne. So, at a later time, in a very risky move, all restrictions on Vikrant were removed by its commanding officer. Threat to INS Vikrant. A major risk to Vikrant with its current condition was the underwater threat from the enemy submarines. Deploying Vikrant at sea would make it the most worthwhile target for the 3 Daphne-class submarines in the west. The sophistication of these Daphne-class submarines' detection capability, along with the homing devices of their torpedoes, was such that once Vikrant was picked up and the screen of its escorts pierced, Vikrant would be an easy target for the enemy submarines. The Indian Navy lacked sufficient capability to defend against an attack on INS Vikrant from the sophisticated Daphne-class submarines of the Pakistan Navy. So the professional opinion was overwhelmingly against deploying the Vikrant in her current state. It was a risk not worth taking in the war. Because if Vikrant got torpedoed and sunk by the enemy submarines, it would be a huge loss to the Indian Navy and India's war efforts. The decision on whether or not to send the Vikrant to sea was a difficult one, but Admiral Nanda was determined that Vikrant needed to prove her worth and had to be deployed during the war. Vikrant was to play an important role in the war, and its deployment was crucial for the overall war strategy of creating a blockade between East and West Pakistan. So, not deploying INS Vikrant in the upcoming war was not an option. The Indian Navy had to deploy INS Vikrant, but it also needed to take all possible precautions and measures to minimize the risk to it. As previously stated, the most serious threat to Vikrant was from the Daphne-class submarines of the Pakistan Navy. These submarines were the most advanced ones of its time. INS Vikrant or its entourage could not defend against these submarines. The only option here with the Indian Navy was to somehow avoid these submarines altogether. The shortcoming of the Daphne-class submarines was its low range. The endurance capability of the Daphne-class submarines of Pakistan restricted them only to the Western Front. They did not have the capability of traveling all the way from Karachi to the Bay of Bengal near East Pakistan and conduct its operations there. Admiral Nanda decided that the best way to neutralize a threat to Vikrant was to place it beyond the reach of these submarines and deploying it with the Indian Navy's Eastern Fleet. This would successfully protect INS Vikrant from Pakistan Navy's Daphne-class submarines. There was, however, still the threat from the submarine PNS Ghazi, whose endurance capability enabled her to travel all the way from Karachi and operate in the Bay of Bengal. A solution had to be devised to mitigate the risk to Vikrant from Ghazi. Admiral Nanda assigned Vikrant to the Eastern Naval Command along with 2 gunships of the Brahmaputra class, 2 ships of the Petya class, and 1 submarine for its defense. To further mitigate the threat to Vikrant from Ghazi, the Indian planners employed deception measures to distract Ghazi away from Vikrant. The core focus of the Indian Navy was to find ways to protect Vikrant and at the same time maximize its usefulness in the upcoming war. Signals intelligence, radio interception. During the preparation to the war, Lieutenant General J.F.R. Jacob, the Chief of Staff of the Eastern Command, insisted on the Eastern Command having its own signal intercept unit. It was fortunate that he was able to ensure this happened because the unit was not only able to intercept Pakistan's communication between West and Eastern wings, but it was also able to break the Pakistan Naval Code. The focus of the Eastern Fleet Commander of the Indian Navy was to use deception techniques to protect INS Vikrant from an enemy attack, most likely from PNS Ghazi. An old destroyer, INS Rajput, that was located at Vishakhapatnam was instructed to use INS Vikrant's call sign 20 on a low-grade cipher to keep requesting for large quantities of logistics as would be required by Vikrant. The signals initiated by INS Rajput using Vikrant's call sign demanded rations, fuel, oils, lubricants, equipments, clothing, and stores, which in quantity and type indicated that these requirements were for an aircraft carrier at Vishakhapatnam. A low-grade cipher was used so it could be easily broken by the enemy intelligence and with information on the channel convince them that INS Vikrant was in fact at Vishakhapatnam while it was located elsewhere at an undisclosed location. Once PNS Ghazi, the primary threat to Vikrant, is neutralized, then INS Vikrant could be deployed to impose the blockade on the Eastern Naval Front in the Bay of Bengal. Lieutenant General Jacobs' Signal Intelligence Unit intercepted communication from Pakistan that according to their intelligence, INS Vikrant was in Vishakhapatnam. This was the confirmation that the Indian side needed. The deception plans had worked. The subterfuges led the Pakistan Navy to believe that Vikrant was harboring at Vishakhapatnam and the Pakistan submarine PNS Ghazi was tasked to destroy it. November 14, 1971, PNS Ghazi moved on its mission in the east to destroy INS Vikrant. The mission for PNS Ghazi was a highly risky one right from the beginning. Starting from West Pakistan, traveling all across the Indian peninsula, then reaching on the east side in the Bay of Bengal, getting close to Vishakhapatnam port, locating INS Vikrant and executing its attack, all this while avoiding detection from the Indian side. And after the attack is executed, swiftly moving out of the Indian attacking perimeter into their safety zone. Had Ghazi been able to sink or even damage the aircraft carrier, the shock effect alone would have been sufficient to upset Indian naval plans and the overall Indian war strategy. The naval situation in Bay of Bengal would have undergone a drastic transformation in favor of Pakistan. The aircraft carrier supported military operations in the coastal areas would have been greatly affected, providing the much needed respite to the Pakistan side. So tempting were the prospects of a possible success that the mission was approved despite several factors which went against it. The Pakistan Navy ordered all its submarines to slip out of harbor quietly on various dates between November 14th and November 24th of 1971. PNS Ghazi, that started from Karachi on November 14th, 1971, was at Madras on November 27th and reached Vishakhapatnam on the night of December 3rd, 1971. The Pakistan Navy directed the Ghazi to occupy Zone Victor, presumably the code name for Vishakhapatnam. The deception measures by the Eastern Naval Command succeeded in convincing Pakistan side that INS Vikrant was in Vishakhapatnam harbor when in fact it was elsewhere. December 3rd, 1971, 5:40 p.m. Indian Standard Time. The Pakistan Air Force attacked multiple Indian airfields in the north. Open hostilities had begun between India and Pakistan for the third time in 3 decades. INS Rajput, which was masquerading as INS Vikrant at Vishakhapatnam, also joined the fleet for operations. Rajput was ordered to leave harbour with the caution that PNS Ghazi would be in the vicinity and all precautions should be taken. Rajput sailed just before midnight on December 3rd, and while proceeding along a narrow channel about half a mile ahead, saw a disturbance in the water. Presuming that this could be the enemy submarine PNS Ghazi diving, the captain of INS Rajput ordered depth charges to be fired. It then proceeded on its course. A depth charge is an explosive charge designed to be dropped from a ship or aircraft and to explode underwater at a preset depth. This is generally used for attacking submarines. 12:15 a.m. December 4th, 1971. People all over India were waiting to hear the Prime Minister's broadcast to the nation. This is when a loud explosion was heard in Vishakhapatnam harbor. Many heard the explosion and came out of their houses thinking it was an earthquake. Some of those who looked out saw a big plume of water high into the sky at a distance from them. It was muffled, yet powerful deep underwater explosion. The morning of 4th, the Indian Navy personnel went out to the spot and located the wreck. The Clarence diving team found in the shallow water near Vishakhapatnam the wreckage of PNS Ghazi. PNS Ghazi had sunk within the first few hours of beginning of hostilities between India and Pakistan. What sank PNS Ghazi? There are many theories on what sank PNS Ghazi. First one, it was destroyed by INS Rajput. The first possibility was that PNS Ghazi was sunk by INS Rajput, since the explosion of Ghazi was heard only a few minutes after Rajput fired depth charges targeting Ghazi. Another possibility was that Ghazi blew up on its own mines. PNS Ghazi laid mines along the narrow channel near the harbor. There is a possibility that it drifted back on the mines it was laying, which blew it up. A third theory was that there was excess accumulation of hydrogen gas, which ignited and exploded the submarine. Several officers who were involved in the investigation of the wreck of Ghazi agree with the last theory that the explosion was caused due to accumulation of hydrogen. Signals sent by Ghazi, recovered from its message logbook, state very explicitly that the submarine had a major problem of hydrogen buildup inside. Perhaps when the buildup of hydrogen exceeded safety limits, the explosion took place, which also blew up all the ordnance Ghazi was carrying. With the destruction of PNS Ghazi, the biggest threat to INS Vikrant was neutralized. INS Vikrant was now able to carry out operations in the Bay of Bengal without any major threats from the enemy. Indian Navy's Western Fleet is sailing out of Bombay when it is clear that war with Pakistan is about to begin in the next few hours. Unknown to the fleet, a Pakistan submarine lays waiting outside the Bombay harbor to target it. The enemy submarine successfully identifies the Indian fleet sailing through and prepares to fire. This incident happened during the 1971 war between India and Pakistan. In early 1971, the Indian Navy was planning out operations along the coast of West Pakistan to subdue the enemy's naval capabilities in the upcoming war. A part of the plan was to use its Western Fleet for operations along the coast of West Pakistan, especially around the Karachi harbor. This video talks about the planning and the potential targeting of India's Western Fleet in December of 1971. The main aim of Indian Navy's Western Naval Command was the destruction of as many Pakistani naval units as possible. A complementary aim was to attack Karachi and to carry out bombardment of Gwadar and Pasni. A blockade of Karachi was to be instituted to prevent petroleum and other essential supplies needed in war from reaching West Pakistan. The naval chief, Admiral Nanda, had clear ideas on how the Navy could be used in its objective, and he felt he needed to get the go ahead from the Prime Minister herself. So, in October of 1971, he went to see the Prime Minister and briefed her on the Navy's plans. During the briefing, he specifically asked the Prime Minister whether the government would politically object to the Navy's attacking Karachi. The PM thought about it and then responded, "Well, Admiral, if there is a war, there is a war." He thanked her and said, "Madam, I have my answer." This was the go ahead he needed for the plans to be put in motion. The use of missile boats in attack mode. The plan was to use the Navy's Western Fleet as a diversion by sailing it out towards Karachi and have it stay around 300 nautical miles from the target. While the enemy's complete focus is on the actions of the Western Fleet, sail out a small attack team of missile boats along the coast and conduct a lightning fast surprise attack at the heart of Pakistan's Navy, Karachi. The Russian-made Osa-class missile boat was to play the crucial role of the attack element in the Indian Navy's plans of assaulting Karachi harbor. These boats started arriving in India in February of 1971, 9 months before the beginning of hostilities. These boats were in fact designed and built by the Russians for the defense of ports and harbors against seaborne landings and for limited short-range attacks against seaborne landing forces. Their use, therefore, as visualized by the Russians, was for defensive operations. The Indian Navy's plans was to use the platform for its assault operation in Karachi. So, many parameters and conditions had to be tested and verified before the final go-ahead was given to these boats for the main plan. The final plans were created and provided to Admiral Kuruvilla, commander of the Western Fleet of Indian Navy. After reviewing the details of the attack boats and the plans for the assault, Admiral Kuruvilla stated that if these boats were to function with him at sea, he could guarantee total victory once contact was made with the enemy surface units, regardless of their superiority, speed, or firepower. Admiral Kohli and Admiral Nanda responded enthusiastically and ordered a series of sea trials with these boats. The first aspect that needed experimenting was the maximum speed at which these boats could be towed. Towing them under peaceful conditions was by itself a difficult task, but towing them at higher speeds under battle conditions was going to be infinitely more difficult. The naval dockyards, however, came up with a good arrangement that allowed these boats with full armament, fuel, and personnel to be towed at a reasonable speed. So the first aspect was resolved. Experiments were carried out with the missile boats in the attacking mode. As a part of this, the missile boat squadron carried out practice missile firing on a BPT, battle practice target, suitably fitted with radar reflectors. These test firings were successful. It was soon apparent on assessment of the defense of Karachi harbor that these missile boats had the potential to be a strong assault force for their operations. Karachi was defended by shore-based military aircrafts. It was necessary, therefore, to minimize the possibilities of the missile boats being attacked from the air. So, it was planned that the attacking force would arrive 150 nautical miles from Karachi at midnight, go in at maximum speed during darkness, carry out the attack, withdraw at maximum speed, and be 150 nautical miles away by dawn. Darkness would make it difficult for the enemy aircraft to locate and attack the force. Despite all these precautions, the risks still were considerable, and some losses had to be accepted. The plans were ready and had to be initiated at the right moment for maximum impact. On December 1st, 1971, a signal was intercepted from west to east Pakistan that warned all merchant shipping not to enter Bay of Bengal. Another signal directed all civil aircraft to keep away from the Indian border. These signals were indicators that Pakistan was about to go to war within a very short time. There was very little time before the war to start, so the naval chief, Admiral Nanda, ordered all ships present in Bombay Harbour to be put to sea within 24 hours. It's all about timing. The Indian Navy anticipated in its deliberations that there was a twofold threat to their naval fleet on the Western Front. Upon declaration of war, the Pakistan Navy would deploy its Daphne-class submarines off Bombay, as well as other important naval harbors in wait for the Indian naval fleet to move out. As soon as the fleet moves out, the submarines would attack the fleet. The Pakistan Navy also had the capability of using its midget submarines that could execute attacks on the Indian naval assets at the harbor as well, even before the Indian fleet had the opportunity to sail out. So, it was vital for the Western Fleet of the Indian Navy to sail out of the harbor before the enemy submarines had the opportunity to deploy outside the harbor and its midget submarines to execute their attacks within the harbor. On the flip side, the Indian Navy could not also move out its fleet too early before the beginning of hostilities, as that would create a lot of logistical hurdles for the Western Fleet. So, this gave the Indian Navy planners a very short window in which its Western Fleet would have to move out of the harbor. This window was calculated to be between 24 and 48 hours before the declaration of war between the two countries. This essentially means that the Indian Navy would have to correctly predict the beginning of full-scale war and move out its Western Fleet at least 24 hours before that time. The more accurate this prediction was, the better would be the outcomes for the Western Fleet of the Indian Navy. This plan and the calculation of the window had a major assumption, which was that the enemy submarines would commence their voyage to Bombay Harbour once the war is declared, or at the most 24 hours before that. This calculation of 24 to 48-hour time window was based on this assumption. This assumption, however, had a shortcoming, because little did the Indian side know that a Pakistani Daphne-class submarine was already outside Bombay Harbour since November 22nd, almost 2 weeks before full-scale war began between the two sides. Unknown to the Indian side, the Pakistan Navy had quietly moved its submarines into the sea between November 14th and November 23rd of 1971. Pakistan Navy's advanced Daphne-class submarine PNS Mangrove was located outside Bombay, patiently waiting for the war to start so she could draw first blood by destroying ships as the Indian Navy's Western Fleet emerged from Bombay Harbour. Indian Western Fleet under threat. PNS Mangrove was in location outside Bombay from November 22nd onwards. On that day itself, she was ordered to arm all torpedoes, and on 23rd of November, she was ordered to assume precautionary stage. On December 1st, 1971, PNS Mangrove had completed her patrol duty at Bombay, so PNS Hanger, which was patrolling off Porbandar, received orders to replace PNS Mangrove. PNS Hanger assumed its position outside Bombay on the same day. On December 1st itself, it had become clear to the Indian planners that full-scale war was to begin in the next 48 hours. So, according to the 24 to 48-hour window plan, on December 2nd, 1971, the Western Fleet moved out of its harbour to execute their tasks in accordance with the Navy's plan. PNS Hanger was in location outside Bombay. The Western Fleet was now in grave danger. Sonar. Submarines locate their targets by means of their radar and sonar used in active and passive mode. Sonar is acronym for Sound Navigation and Ranging. It is a device that sends out ultrasonic waves towards the target, particularly ships and submarines, and if contact is made, an indication is received that gives the range, direction, and possible depth of the target. PNS Hanger had very powerful sonars that could detect targets as far as 25 nautical miles. She was therefore well aware of the approach of the Western Fleet. This was a dream target for the crew of Hanger. Rear Admiral Raja Menon of the Indian Navy met with Captain PNS Hanger, Commander Tasneem Ahmed, along with his second in command, sometime after the war. The details of what happened, what transpired inside Hanger at that crucial moment, are from what Admiral Raja learnt of the events during the conversation and also from the book Story of Pakistan Navy. PNS Hanger was located outside Bombay on the night of 2nd of December. It was on the surface when at 11:40 p.m. a large formation of ships was detected on her radar about 35 miles away. Hanger closed this formation to a range of 26 miles at 12:49 am on the 3rd of December and then dived to a depth of 40 meters. It then tracked the ships on its sonar till the early hours of the morning. A quick sweep by their radar at periscope depth revealed that the formation consisted of 6 escorts, screening a main body of 4 ships. This was without any doubt the Western Fleet, comprising the cruiser INS Mysore with supporting auxiliaries in her escorts. There was a problem though. PNS Hanger did not have clearance to initiate the attack on the incoming fleet. War had not yet been declared between the two sides, and if PNS Hanger launched its torpedoes and sank one or more of the ships on the approaching fleet, it would have been an event that would start a full-scale war. A great responsibility therefore rested on the shoulders of the captain of Hanger, Commander Tasneem Ahmed. Declaration of war is a serious decision that has both military and political components to it. It cannot be taken lightly because a side would have plans in place for the event for optimum use of element of surprise on multiple fronts and to maximize gains from the initial assault. In Pakistan's context, in 1971, sinking of these vessels, even though may have done some serious damage to the Indian Navy's Western Fleet, would have led to the Pakistan Air Force losing its element of surprise for its plan of multiple simultaneous air raids on Indian Air Force installations in the north. So attacking the incoming Indian Naval Fleet before the declaration of war was not a decision PNS Mangrove could take unilaterally. At around 3 am on December 3, 1971, the Indian Navy's Western Fleet was passing through the kill zone of PNS Hanger. On the approach of the Western Fleet, near chaos prevailed within PNS Hanger. The captain was against attacking the fleet at a stage when war was not declared, while other crew members wanted him to launch the attack irrespective of whether war was declared. Eventually, the members of the crew were overruled by the captain and they decided not to launch the attack on the Indian fleet. The Indian fleet passed over Hanger unaware of what was happening below them. It is also important to note that none of the warships of the Western Fleet were able to detect the presence of Hanger since the fleet was sailing at high speed. The Pakistan Air Force attacked the Indian airfields approximately between 5:40 and 5:45 p.m. the same day, around 15 hours later. The crew of PNS Hanger came to know about this only at 8:20 am on December 4th. The captain and the crew of PNS Hanger were extremely disappointed on missing such a dream target, as it is detailed out in the book Story of Pakistan Navy. Admiral Nanda also wrote about this event in his book, The Man Who Bombed Karachi. Years later, the wartime commanding officer of the Pakistan submarine Hanger informed me that he had been lying in wait outside Bombay Harbour and that the Western Fleet had passed over him on the night of 2nd to the 3rd of December. He had been egged on by many hotheads in the control room to fire his torpedoes, but he had refused on the grounds that war had not broken out. The Western Fleet was already at sea when war was declared. the Indian Western Fleet now could execute its planned operations during the war. It was due to the effective planning and foresight of the Indian Navy that at the time of beginning of hostilities, the Indian Navy was already at sea and was in a good position to give a near immediate response to the enemy's first move. The Indian side undeniably got the advantage from the poor communication systems and processes on the enemy side. This, however, does not take anything away from the superior tactics of the Indian Navy. After all, chance favors the prepared mind. In Indian Navy's response to the enemy with the attack on Karachi, the primary role of the Western Fleet was to stay in the area between 200 to 300 nautical miles from Karachi and pose a threat to it. This would draw the attention of the Pakistan fleet towards them, while the Pakistan Navy's attention was on the moves of the Western Fleet of the Indian Navy. Conduct a swift lightning strike at Karachi Harbour using the Osa class missile boats. These boats were to make a thrust from Saurashtra coast and conduct a clandestine, swift attack on all enemy naval assets in and around Karachi. This attack was codenamed Operation Trident. Operation Trident, the attack on Karachi. 1971, the Chief of Naval Staff of the Indian Navy, Admiral Nanda, had concluded from available intelligence that an attack by Pakistan was imminent around December 3, 1971. So he ordered the Western Fleet to clear Bombay Harbour by December 2nd. The captain of each ship was given sealed envelopes that contained orders for the attack on Karachi. These were to be opened only upon the outbreak of war. The fleet cleared Bombay Harbour. That is when the third war between India and Pakistan broke out. This was approximately 12 hours after the Indian Navy's Western Fleet was at sea. So, when the first Pakistan attack on the Indian airfields took place on the evening of December 3rd, 1971, the Indian Navy was in a position to give a near immediate response. Initially, the Western Fleet was deployed in an area about 200 to 300 nautical miles from Karachi. The primary role of the Western Fleet was to pose a threat to Karachi. The plan was to remain outside the seaward radius of the operation of Pakistani aircraft by the day and to attack by night, because these aircrafts did not have night attack capability. In this manner, the attention of the Pakistani fleet would be drawn towards the Indian fleet operating to the west of Karachi, thereby allowing the missile boats to make a thrust from the Saurashtra coast. 3 missile boat attacks were originally planned. These were codenamed Operation Trident on December 4th, 1971, Operation Python on December 6th, and Operation Triumph on December 10th of 1971. Operation Trident. The first missile attack on Karachi, codenamed Operation Trident, was conceived, planned, and executed by the officers of Missile Squadron 25KS. Extensive workups for the commanders and crews of the Osa missile boats were carried out in the drills, firing up practice missiles. It was found that the missile boats needed to be accompanied by bigger ships. The missile boats were escorted by 2 Petias, INS Kilton and INS Kachal. Missile attacks were to be carried out by the missile boats INS Nipat, INS Nirghat, and INS Veer. They were armed with 4 missiles each. Meanwhile, Pakistan had warned all merchant ships bound for Karachi not to approach within 75 nautical miles of the harbour between sunset and dawn. This meant that any ship picked up on radar within the distance was most likely to be a Pakistani naval vessel on patrol. Missile boat K-25 Squadron Commander Babru Yadav placed himself aboard INS Nipat to lead the first attack on Karachi. The Osa missile boats took off in an arrowhead formation, with INS Nipat leading, INS Nirghat to port on the left, and INS Veer to starboard on the right. INS Kilton was lying astern, that is, in line and behind. The oil tanker INS Poshak was stationed midway, and her latitude and longitude were made available to the task force. Sunset was at 1812 hours, that is 6:12 p.m., and the task group was heading northward for Karachi at high speed, hugging the Saurashtra coast. The orders were that maximum missiles should be fired in the first attack, as surprise was considered the dominant factor for overall success. They were in arrowhead formation, with Nirghat 5 miles on the port quarter and Veer lagging behind on the starboard quarter. At approximately 22:30 hours, that is 10:30 p.m., Commander Yadav was about 40 miles from Karachi and saw a blip on his radar. He evaluated it as a warship coming towards their formation. In view of the high rate of closing, he ordered Nirghat to alter course and engage this target. The Pakistani warship engaged by INS Nirghat was the Pakistani destroyer PNS Khyber. The Khyber was patrolling the southwest approaches to Karachi at approximately 22:15 hours, and that is when it identified from a radar contact that an enemy force was approaching Karachi. She altered course and increased speed to intercept the Indian attack force. At about 22:40 hours, that is 10:40 p.m., PNS Khyber was within INS Nirghat's range at a distance of approximately 20 nautical miles. Nirghat fired her first missile at Khyber. The crew of the Khyber mistook the approaching missile to be an aircraft and opened up close-range anti-aircraft guns, but did not succeed in preventing the missile from hitting her. The first missile struck Khyber on the starboard side just below the electrician mess deck at about 22:45 hours. The ship immediately lost propulsion and plunged into darkness. A huge flame shot up in boiler number 1 and a thick black smoke poured out of the funnel. In complete darkness, officers from the PNS Khyber passed the message to Karachi headquarters of being under air attack. Pakistan Navy's minesweeper PNS Muhafiz, which was on patrol, was sent out to assist PNS Khyber. PNS Khyber was now 17 nautical miles away from INS Nirghat. So Commander Yadav ordered Nirghat to fire its second missile at Khyber. The second missile also successfully hit Khyber. Muhafiz was quickly approaching Khyber and it witnessed the second missile hitting it. INS Veer, meanwhile, reported contact line on her starboard bow with PNS Muhafiz. Commander Yadav ordered them to engage this target. The missile immediately locked on and INS Veer fired at PNS Muhafiz. PNS Muhafiz was heading towards the burning wreckage of PNS Khyber when she saw a ball of light hurtling towards her, and she too suffered a direct missile hit towards the rear of the ship. PNS Muhafiz caught fire immediately and disintegrated and sank fast. So fast that it was not even able to send out a distress message. The Pakistan Navy had lost its first vessel. The second missile hit the Khyber at approximately 22:50 hours, that is 10:50 p.m. PNS Khyber began to list to port, that is, it started taking on water and tilting on one side. Soon, the list to port became dangerous and the ship had become enveloped with uncontrollable fires. It was decided to abandon ship. Within 15 minutes, PNS Khyber had been abandoned by all those who could leave the ship. As men jumped from the sinking destroyer, more explosions continued to rock the ship due to the bursting of ammunition. The Khyber went down at 23:50, 11:50 p.m. On the radar screen of INS Nipat, the Khyber first showed as a blip. After being hit, the blip started diminishing in its size till it disappeared altogether. PNS Khyber was no more. After the sinking of Khyber, Commander Yadav ordered INS Kilton to join Nirghat. while INS Nipat continued to steer north with INS Veer on its starboard quarter. Soon after, Commander Yadav's radar on INS Nipat also developed two firm contacts at about 25 nautical miles. These were Pakistan's PNS Shah Jahan and Venus Challenger. The port of Karachi was about 32 miles. Nipat fired its first missile at Venus Challenger. The missile scored a direct hit and the Venus Challenger exploded immediately. On the radar of Nipat, the first blip broke into two distinct ones and then disappeared altogether. The Venus Challenger was sunk. INS Nipat fired its second missile at PNS Shah Jahan and again scored a direct hit. PNS Shah Jahan did not sink as a result of the hit, but was severely damaged and made inoperational. By this time, the distance between the three boats had opened out. Time and distance precluded the two boats from rejoining Nipat, so Commander Yadav instructed them to act independently and rendezvous as planned with the tanker INS Poshak. Having two more missiles left in its armor, Commander Yadav continued further towards Karachi. That is when Nipat's radar picked up the Kiamari oil tanks. The range was 18 miles and Nipat fired her third missile. INS Nipat scored yet another direct hit on the oil tanks. The tanks exploded immediately with an explosion so big that it could be seen on the horizon. Commander Yadav reversed course to get outside the Pakistan Air Force's attack range by first light, with the intention of fueling and returning to Bombay at high speed. On his way back, Commander Yadav broke radio silence to transmit the code of a successful missile attack on enemy installations. The code was Angar. The attack had been successfully executed in accordance with all the plans prepared by the Indian Navy. The message was received at the MOR, the Maritime Operations Room in Bombay on December 4th with great jubilation. Operation Trident was a huge success.